I'm going to step out on a limb here, and I'm going to suggest that probably every one of us in this room knows what a hot tub is. We go on a vacation or we go somewhere, we go to a motel or hotel, and they got a swimming pool and they got a hot tub. And we like to go to the hot tub. It kind of gives us a sensuous feeling and a relaxing feeling. And if you stay in there long enough, you kind of get floppy and you're just kind of laid back, and it's not demanding at all of anything. It's kind of fun, and you have the air bubbles hitting you on the back or going through your feet and everything, and it's soothing, and we really enjoy that. There is such a thing called hot tub syndrome, and I believe that's what Christianity has been hit with in the world today. We like that hot tub feeling. And what people have done is they want that feeling in Christianity. And so they work at making that happen in Christianity. They work at it. They try to get that same feeling. They don't want to have any real commitment. They don't want it to be demanding. They just kind of want it to be fun and soothing and relaxing and whatever they like it to be. And I would step out on a limb, and at least in some congregations of the church, you probably could switch the seats for hot tubs and raise your attendance. I'm not sure, but that might happen. But I call that the hot tub syndrome. You know, that is a kind of an imaginary thing, I guess. But that isn't reality. I want you to see King Solomon in all his glory. He had all the health he wanted. He had all the wealth he wanted. He had 300 wives and 700 concubines. I mean, he had everything at his fingertips. And he lived what most of us would say the life of luxury. He had everything. And man, if we could just have that life. But you know what Solomon realized at the end of his life? It had actually taken him away from God. And he wrote in Ecclesiastes a number of times. He said, all is vanity. It is all vanity. It's no good for anything when it comes right down to it. And yet today in the world, people are trying to do things the way they want to do them, like Solomon did. They have that same attitude. They want to get fixed in the world. They want to have the things of the world. And you know, we have a thing in our society today called depression. And it is more rampant in our society today than it has ever been. And the reason is because people want things of the world so badly that they get desperate. And then they sink into depression. And the question always comes up, what then? Well, we're in Mark chapter 5 today, and there's actually two stories in one here. Jesus meets this fellow Jairus. He comes to Jesus and he wants his daughter healed. And in the process of walking to Jairus' house, and I'll preach on that sermon another day, but in the process of walking to his house, this woman who's had a bleeding issue for 12 years comes and she touches the hem of his garment, and she's healed. And that's what I want to talk about today, and that's in Mark chapter 5. And I think in this text, we can find the answer to what then, if we look hard enough. You see, this woman had an issue with blood. She was bleeding all the time. For 12 years, she struggled with this illness. And I'm sure there were times that it was awful painful. And she was in this great pain. And she couldn't go out in public because she was considered unclean. And so she had to stay in her home, and she probably had some relatives or somebody who actually felt sorry for her a little bit, bring her stuff to eat and take care of her that way. But she wasn't supposed to be in public. She was dealing with a life-threatening issue in her life, a physical thing. And it kind of reminds me of people today. And I know of a fellow by the name of Dave who has this chronic pain. He's always in pain. And he struggles with it. And And he just doesn't know what to do. He's tried every doctor. He's tried everything that he can possibly try. And there's just no end to this pain, and there's no end to this illness. And he's desperate. He's sunk into a depression, and he's very desperate. And that's kind of how this lady was. She had tried every medication of the day to help her to be healed. She had tried every naturopath, if they had them in those days. Surgery, if there was surgery to do, she tried it. If there were herbs to take to try fix it, she tried it. She tried everything humanly possible to cure her of this illness. And nothing worked. And this lady was desperate. And so she found herself in a real dilemma. She was in a state of hopelessness. I imagine she was asking herself questions like, well, is this fate? Is this what life is all about? Is this what I'm dealt in life? Or do I have to deal with this the rest of my life? I mean, I can't go out in public. I can't do the things that other people do. I have this issue all the time. And life wasn't supposed to be that way. And so she could have sunk into depression. And I don't know, maybe she had. But it would have been a very difficult thing to deal with. And so she's thinking, I will take absolutely any risk I can. And you know, when people are desperate, they will do the strangest things. They will do things that you'll just shake your head and say, why? But because they're desperate, they'll do whatever they think they need to do to find something to get rid of that desperation. And she's in this hopeless state. And imagine this. Imagine she hears about Jesus. She hears that there is this man named Jesus from Nazareth, and he is going around and he is healing the sick. He's causing the blind to see. He's doing all of these miracles. And what's she going to think? Oh, I need to get to this guy. I need to find this Jesus, because I'll bet you he can help me too. If he can make the blind see, this shouldn't be a struggle for him to cure me. And I'm sure that's what she's thinking. And so all of a sudden her hope is up a little bit. There's a hope in the midst of all of her despair. She heard about Jesus. It's kind of like when you go to the doctor and the doctor says you got cancer, and you're thinking, of course, everybody that gets cancer thinks immediately, well, this is the end of my life. I'm going to die. It might be a year. It might be 6 months. It might be 2 months. It might be however long. But I'm going to die because I've got cancer. And you go to the doctor, and the doctor says, yeah, you got cancer, but we're really successful at curing that cancer. We have about a 90% success rate in people living. So we're going to start you on treatments. We're going to do this and this. And your hope just soars. You're like, wow, I'm not going to die yet. That's awesome. I can be cured of this. And that's probably how she was feeling when she heard about Jesus. She's going to get a new lease on life. She's going to get back to normal. She's going to have her health back. And she can go and do things and that other people are doing, and be out in public again and look after herself and not have to have people come in and see her and all that stuff. So she's in this desperate situation, and she has this dilemma going on, because how is she now going to get to Jesus? I mean, she can't go out in public. If anybody finds out in public, she's cast out of the city. Not just out of her home, not just out of the marketplace or out of the public. She's cast out of the city because she is impure. And she's going to live out there with the wild beasts or whatever outside the city. And so she has this dilemma. How am I going to get to Jesus? Well, you know, there's a good thing and a bad thing about dilemmas. Because you have to make a decision. But you want to make the right decision, not the bad decision. And so she had to make a decision. And her first decision was, I'm going to take a risk. I'm going to step out where the people tell me I'm not supposed to be. Where they say I can't be, because that's the only place I'm going to be able to find Jesus. So I'm going to step out there and take a risk. I'm unclean. I'm not supposed to be in public. But I'm going to go out there and I'm going to take the chance. And I'm going to just see if he can't heal me of this. You know, there's a story when we were down in the States about a woman who apparently was depressed. And she claimed to be in a very desperate situation. Her husband was actually a preacher in the church. And one night, she made a decision. And we all do this. We have dilemmas. We're desperate from one time to the next. And we all make a decision. And we have to live with that decision. And her decision was to take a shotgun when he was sleeping, put it in the middle of his back, and pull the trigger. She killed him. And her defense was that he made her depressed, and she was so desperate, and she didn't know what else to do. That was a really bad decision. But you see, when we're faced with dilemmas, we always make decisions. And this lady, this woman in the Bible here, says, I'm going to take the chance. I'm going to take the risk. I'm going to stick my neck out. And I'm going to go out there into the public, and I'm going to see if I can't get contact with Jesus. But then she made another decision, just as important decision. She said, I'm going to do it very quietly. Well, there was a reason she wanted to do it quietly, because she didn't want to get caught. But she said, I'm going to do this really quietly. I'm not going to make a scene. I don't want to go out there and be the focal attention of all the people because Jesus did a miracle for me. She said, I don't want any of that. I want this to be done very quietly. I'm going to do it by faith in Jesus. I'm going to believe 100% that Jesus can heal me of this affliction. And I'm going to go out there, and I'm just going to touch his garment. I'm just going to wiggle my way through that crowd. And I'm going to touch his garment. That's all I need to do. And I know I'll be healed. Because this had been happening with other people. They had touched Jesus' garment, or they had gone to Jesus, and Jesus had healed him. He'd done all of these miracles. And so she says, I'm just going to go out there real quietly, and I'm just going to grab a hold of his garment. And so out she goes, and she gets out there, and she's in the crowd, and nobody's found her out yet. And she's getting close enough, and you can imagine the crowd around Jesus. I don't know if you've ever been in a crowd, but sometimes when you're in a crowd, we were in Lithuania, and we were thinking about going over there and doing mission work. And one of the people said, well, let's get on the bus and go to this part of the city. And we thought, okay, get on a bus. You know, we've done that in Edmonton a couple of times. We know what transit's like, public transit's like, except when about 80% of the people in that city use public transit. It becomes a little different situation. And so you could literally stand on that bus and lift your feet off the ground and not fall, because the crowd was so tight around you, you didn't know who all was pressing against you, but you knew you were being pressed on. And so it was crowded. And so this crowd is around Jesus. And she gets all the way through that crowd, and she touches the hem of his garment. Now, she was hoping, I'll just turn around, and I'll get back out of this crowd, and I'll go back home, and I'll be healed, and everything will be fine. And that was good with her. She didn't want any scene made. So she does all of this. She makes a decision, and she follows through on that decision. The minute she touches Jesus' garment, it says that Jesus knew that power had gone out from him. What he's talking about is he's not saying, I got really exhausted and tired all of a sudden, felt like I could sleep. That's not what he's saying. He knew that the Holy Spirit had used power to heal somebody or to do something. He knew that. And so he turns around and he says the question. He says, who touched me? Now, here are his disciples. And his disciples are trying to stay close to him, and they're probably getting pushed around by the crowd. And they look at Jesus and they go, what? Look at this crowd. Everybody's touching you. Everybody's pressing in to be around you. But that's not what Jesus was talking about. Because Jesus knew that someone by faith had touched him for a healing. And he knew that. And he said, who touched me? Now, if you were that woman, what would you have done? Would you have run? Would you have lied? Would you have just kept quiet and said nothing? Or would you have, trembling and in fear, approached Jesus and said, it was me? Well, that's what she did. It says, trembling with fear, she approached Jesus and she said, it was me. And Jesus looked at her, and no doubt, she's thinking, I'm in big trouble. Because I've just been caught. I was out here in the public. I was unclean. And I was unclean by the temple. The priest had pronounced her unclean. The public said she was unclean. God said she was unclean in that situation. And so she's thinking, man, I'm in a heap of trouble. I have a problem. But I'll face the music. Because she'd been healed. You see, when she touched his garment, she was healed. And so Jesus looks at her, and probably she gets this shocked look on her face because he uses a term of endearment. He says, daughter. Now, we don't know how old this woman was, but the idea of calling her daughter is a term of endearment. And he says, daughter, your faith has healed you. Now, can you imagine what she would have experienced at that moment? Really? Wow. Can you imagine the excitement in her life? At the same time, the humility? That what she had decided to do actually helped her to be healed? You see, she believed that Jesus could do it. She believed that 100%. That's why she went and touched his garment. She would have never touched his garment if she hadn't believed that he could do it. And so Jesus says, your faith has healed you. And then he says, go in peace. And he wasn't talking about going and never having any conflict in her life again. But he was talking about going with his peace in her life. Because of her faith. He said, you can have a peace in you that goes beyond understanding. You can have my peace in your life. And so what Jesus did is he took a broken person and he made her whole again. He healed her. Well, Jesus can do that for you and I as well. Jesus can make us whole. And I got to tell you, each and every one of us is broken. It doesn't matter. We talked in our class today. And I've talked in other situations. And you know that all of us have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. And so we are broken. All of us. And spiritually we need healing. And Jesus is the only one that can heal us. But you know, for Jesus to do that, we have to go to Jesus. We have to search him out. We have to find him. We have to make a decision. We all have dilemmas. You know, we face dilemmas every day in our life. I don't know if you remember the name Aaron Rolston, but in 2003, Aaron Rolston, who was a nature enthusiast, went hiking all by himself. He had done it many times before. He had hiked the place where he was hiking many times before. And he loved the place. And so he went hiking. And while he was hiking, one thing after another happened. And he ended up somehow that a rock broke loose, a big boulder. And it pinched his arm. Fell on his arm and pinched his arm. And he couldn't get his arm out from under that rock. And he was running low on supplies because this happened on his way back from the hike. He was on his way home. And so he knew he was in trouble. And he spent 5 days trying to move this rock off of his arm. His arm was mangled under the rock, but he was trying to move it off so he could get out of there and get to safety and get some help. And he couldn't move that rock. And so he had a dilemma. What's he going to do? Is he going to sit there and die with that rock pinning his arm there? And he had to make a decision. Well, he made a decision. And he reached into his pocket and he pulled out his pocket knife and he cut. And he cut until he cut his arm off. And then he walked and got help. He walked to safety. He still lives. But he had to cut his arm off. He had to make that decision to cut his arm off so that he could live. You and I face all those kinds of dilemmas every day in our life. We face diseases. We face challenges in our relationships. We face major things. We face minor things. We face dilemmas every day. We have to make decisions every day. And they're important. But I want to talk about the spiritual decision you need to make. Because that's what's most important. You see, we have all those physical things, but we have a dilemma. We are spiritually pinned under a rock when we're in sin. We cannot get out from under the slavery of that sin. We cannot get out from the guilt of that sin. Because that sin weighs us down and doesn't allow us to move. And we have to make a decision. And when we make the decision we have to make is, am I going to just go with the flow and allow that sin to weigh me down until one day I die and then I'm done? Or are we going to decide to cut ourselves, as much as it hurts, as painful as it is, are we going to cut ourselves free from that sin, from the slavery of that sin, from the burden of that sin, and turn to Jesus and have life? Because you see, the only way we can release ourselves from the pressure and the burden of sin is to turn to Jesus and have Him make us whole again. Otherwise, we are not going to be whole and we will die in our lost state. And so we need to make a decision. Am I going to turn to Jesus? Am I going to go to Him? Am I going to get Him to make me whole so I can rejoice and live again? If we don't make that decision, we're going to be in big trouble. This morning, I want you to know that Jesus is always ready to have you come to Him and to have Him make you whole again. But you have to make a decision to go to Jesus. You have to make a decision to turn to Him by faith, just as the woman did, to be whole again. He says, come to me, all you who are burdened, heavy laden. I'll make it light for you. I'll make it easy. My yoke is easy. But you have to come to me. If you want to come to Jesus this morning, if you haven't been to Jesus, you want Him to make you whole again this morning, you need to come to Him. You need to make a decision to come and meet Jesus and have Him as your Lord and Savior. And you can do that right here this morning while we stand and sing.
I have decided to follow Jesus. I have decided to follow Jesus. I have decided to follow Jesus. No turning back, no turning back. The world behind me, the cross before me. The world behind me, the cross before me. The world behind me, the cross before me. No turning back, no turning back. Though none go with me, I still will follow. Though none go with me, I still will follow. Though none go with me, I still will follow. No turning back, no turning back. Will you decide now to follow Jesus? Will you decide now to follow Jesus? Will you decide now to follow Jesus? No turning back, no turning back. I have decided to follow Jesus. I have decided to follow Jesus. I have decided to follow Jesus. No turning back, no turning back.